Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can all hear me. I'm Laura Trevelyan of the BBC. I'd like to welcome you all to this high-level event on vaccines, which is being hosted by UNICEF and the Permanent Mission of Japan to the United Nations. Now, of course, this is a very important topic. Public mistrust of vaccines means that the world is at risk of taking a step backwards in the fight against deadly, yet eminently preventable infectious diseases. So warn many global health experts. The biggest global study into attitudes on immunization suggests that confidence is low in some parts of the world. And the World Health Organization lists vaccine hesitancy as one of the top 10 threats to global health. So we're going to explore this topic today with our speakers and our panel of very distinguished guests that we have. But this is a subject that my own network, the BBC, has taken an interest in. We recently had a whole mini-series on vaccines, and as a result of that, we covered the increase in measles outbreaks that we're seeing around the world. Here in the United States, there are more than 1,000 cases that have been reported this year, almost 600 here in New York City. But one of the worst affected countries when it comes to measles, with almost 30,000 cases and almost 500 deaths since the start of the year, is the Philippines. And my colleague, Tulip Mazumdar, who's our global health correspondent, travelled to Manila in the Philippines to find out why. And I'd just like to show you a little bit of her report now.
This is what can happen when measles takes hold. James hasn't eaten for days, and he's now developed pneumonia. Some of these babies are less than 6 months old, too young to have the measles vaccine. They rely on others around them being immunised, so they don't even come into contact with the disease. In the next ward, 2-year-old Princess lies limp and exhausted. First, she had a cough, her grandmother tells me. Then, suddenly, a severe fever and rash all over her body. It was so frightening. Princess was not immunised. Her family were worried vaccines might harm her.
We were admitting 30 to 40 and even as high as 80 patients admitted every night. We were so frustrated, disappointed, because the vaccine for measles is given free at the different health centers. But people would not have themselves immunized, would not bring their children because of misconceptions.
Much of these misconceptions centre on the controversial rollout of a new dengue vaccine in 2016. 800,000 school children were vaccinated using Dengvaxia, but the manufacturer later disclosed that its product posed a risk to some children. Some families blamed the vaccine for their children's deaths. Investigations are underway, but no link has been proven. Health officials say inaccurate and sensationalist information about vaccines in general spread online, resulting in the confidence in all vaccines plummeting. Social media is a major part of life in the Philippines. Misinformation online is a global problem, but here it's had a devastating impact on children's health. Misinformation and fear overtook evidence and science for many parents deciding whether to vaccinate their children. Health facilities and medics can also be difficult to access in these poor slum areas. There are trust issues too. So when accurate information wasn't available or wasn't believed, many parents instead listened to rumour and scaremongering online. The infection of misinformation, as the UN Children's Agency UNICEF has called it, can spread as far and fast as a computer virus. Arlene bitterly regrets her decision not to vaccinate her 2 children. 2-year-old Jenilyn and her 8-month-old little brother Jean-Paul died of measles within a week of each other.
I just feel so angry. I shouldn't have listened to the TV and social media. I was afraid, but I should have protected my children.
To the measles outbreak in the Philippines. Well, for more on this topic, I'd like to introduce now UNICEF's Executive Director, Henrietta Fore, to make her opening remarks. Henrietta.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. That is a very moving video, so thank you very much for sharing it with us. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this important discussion. My thank you to Ambassador Besho and the government of Japan for its commitment to this issue and to universal health coverage more broadly. And thank you to our many partner organizations who are represented here today, including WHO, the Gates Foundation, Harvard, and Facebook. Vaccines work, and we must work together as one to combat misinformation, build trust in vaccines and vaccination programs, and improve the quality of care to give every child everywhere the life-saving gift of immunization. According to WHO, immunization prevents between 2 to 3 million deaths every year. And it wasn't always this way. Before vaccines, millions of children fell victim each year to diseases like diphtheria, measles, polio, tetanus, meningitis, and pertussis. For children, these diseases could be a death sentence, or they resulted in long-term disabilities. Today, the world is closer than ever to eradicating polio. We've achieved an 80% decline in measles deaths, and neonatal tetanus has been eliminated in all but 13 countries. Still, an estimated 20 million infants are missing out on the benefits of vaccination each year, putting them at an unacceptable risk of disease and putting their communities and countries at risk of outbreaks. We're already seeing an alarming spike in the measles cases worldwide. Countries like Brazil, Madagascar, the Philippines, which we've just seen on the video, and Ukraine have all experienced outbreaks over the last 2 years. Examples like this and many more, including here in the United States, represent a collective failure. And as a community, as a global community, we must address the root causes of this failure. Root causes like poverty, lack of availability, and discrimination. Think of a child in a conflict zone where health services have been destroyed. Think of a refugee child. Perhaps there are no available immunizations within reach of where they are. Perhaps her parents don't have the information they need on why vaccines are important. And think of children in middle and high-income countries like the United States, whose parents are delaying or refusing to vaccinate their children because of misinformation and mistrust. In many ways, vaccines have become the victims of their own success. As immunizations have prevented diseases, these diseases have become less visible, and people believe that they can let their guard down. But like the diseases that vaccines prevent, misinformation about vaccines can spread fast, especially online. The proliferation of information on digital media makes it increasingly difficult to present to parents what they need to know, the sources of trust, and when it comes to the benefits of immunization. One harrowing example comes from Pakistan, one of just 3 countries where polio is still a threat. During a recent polio vaccination campaign in Peshawar, a staged video produced by anti-vaxxers went viral on social media. It showed children allegedly suffering side effects from the polio vaccine. The result, nearly 1 million children did not get the vaccines that they needed. In short, we must not allow mistrust and misinformation to roll back the significant progress made in combating these diseases worldwide. As a global community, we need new tactics to build public trust in vaccines and to break down not only barriers of hesitancy, but of availability, of cost, and of access. We call on governments and donors to invest in quality health systems that deliver quality and affordable immunizations to all children, no matter who they are, no matter where they live. This includes support for health professionals and community workers to give concerned parents accurate information about why vaccines work and why they're so important. We call on technology companies like the ones represented here today to do more to promote credible, quality, and scientifically proven content about vaccines. This could include modifying search and recommendation algorithms to combat misinformation and prioritize true, verified information at the top of any search result. So let's work together on this. And we call on parents everywhere to vaccinate their children. UNICEF's own experience shows that we can make a difference across all these areas. In the Philippines, which you've just seen on the screen, we worked closely with the government to ensure that vaccination services reach all children. We're also running Community for Immunity, a social media campaign to encourage parents to vaccinate their children using scientifically accurate information on measles. The result? The measles outbreak now contained in the Philippines with 30% fewer cases by May of this year compared to the same period last year in 2018. So the lesson is clear. If we combine stronger programs and greater access to vaccines with scientifically accurate information to build trust, we can break down the barriers between children and the vaccinations they need and deserve. And along the way, we strengthen basic health services in communities that most need these improvements. A key step in our goal of universal health coverage, in which every person, no matter where they live, has access to primary health services that they need, including immunizations. Vaccines work, but that doesn't mean that our work is over. So let's continue improving access to these life-saving vaccinations everywhere, and let's push back against the rising tide of misinformation and mistrust. Let us also make sure to leave no one behind. Thank you.
Now, Japan is co-sponsoring this event with UNICEF, and now I'd like to invite Japan's ambassador to the United Nations, His Excellency Koro Besho, to speak.
Thank you, Laura and Henrietta. At the outset, I would really like to express my appreciation to the co-organizers, that is certainly UNICEF, and partners and participants for making this event possible. I would also like to truly appreciate dedicated tireless efforts of UNICEF, WHO, Gavi, and partners for delivering immunization to children all over the world who really need immunization. And I'm also very grateful that today we are joined by wonderful panelists from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as Facebook. I think it's great that we have these people to tell us their experiences. Today's topic, immunization, is very much at the heart of Japan's global health policy and priorities, most notably universal health coverage. Ensuring and scaling up immunization coverage is one of the cornerstones of primary healthcare and an important entry point for UHC. It has also been a key priority of Japan's own UHC system as well as its foreign assistance. Today's event is very timely as we, the member states, are undertaking outcome document negotiations towards the United Nations General Assembly high-level meeting on universal health coverage, which will be held in September. Japan has been engaging with the high-level meeting process, including by serving as a chair of the group of friends of UHC and global health. As part of Japan's further efforts to achieve UHC globally, we are hosting multiple key global high-level events this year. I want to say a few things about that. The first thing is what is happening right now in Osaka, Japan, G20 Osaka Summit, which started about half a day ago and is still going on. And it has its ministerial meetings. Many ministerial meetings are taking place, but I want to draw your attention to the one that is taking place right now. That is a joint ministerial meeting between the health ministers and the finance ministers. We often have the health ministers meeting together, not in the G20 context. This is the first time. We have the finance ministers meeting together, but often when we are talking amongst health people, we realize that resources financing is one of the key issues, and it's very important to get the finance ministers involved. So we are hoping that we'll have positive outcomes from this joint ministerial meeting. We will also be having the 7th Tokyo International Conference on African Development. That will be in August. We call it TICAD short, in short, to TICAD 7 for short. And the launch meeting of Gavi's third replenishment at the margins of TICAD 7. Today, the challenges facing the world in its efforts to achieve the health-related SDG targets are numerous and complex. As Henrietta was saying, stagnating immunization coverage is one of these challenges. Adding another layer to this challenge is, as have been mentioned very forcefully by Henrietta, is misinformation and on the safety of vaccines. And this can quickly travel, especially in this era of very quick communication tools. For example, as a long-standing partner in the global effort to eradicate polio, Japan is concerned by misinformation and misperception of polio vaccinations, which have resulted in vaccine refusals at this very critical time when a polio-free world is near or maybe within our grasp, but it's not coming to the final stage because of this. Last Friday, Prime Minister Abe announced that Japan would contribute to achieving the goals of saving approximately 1 million patients from major infectious diseases and providing immunization for 1.3 million children around the world. This is part of our initiative at the G20 Osaka Summit, as I was mentioning, which is taking place now. And it is an effort to achieve the SDGs through realizing the idea of human security and the inclusive and sustainable world where, as Henrietta said, no one is left behind. While the challenges are complex, we must admit that innovation and partnership are the keys to turn these challenges into opportunities for increased awareness on the importance of immunization. This constitutes a cornerstone of primary health care, together with water, sanitation, and nutrition. Moreover, these all lead to the achievement of universal health coverage, which our leaders will commit to in September in this high-level meeting to be held in New York. In closing, I look forward to a very active, thought-provoking discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Besso. Now, there are a number of people who couldn't be here today but wanted to contribute to the debate about the importance of vaccinating children, and I'd like to share their messages with you now.
Good afternoon. As you know, vaccines are among the most powerful health tools in the history of medicine. And yet, far too many children, 1 in 5, do not receive the vaccines they need. As a result, we are now seeing a resurgence in diseases that were close to elimination. Measles, for example, has seen a 300% increase in cases globally, even though it's entirely preventable with an effective vaccine. Vaccine hesitancy is one factor contributing to this disturbing trend. We must make sure people have reliable information, but we must also take the time to listen to people's concerns and fears. Although vaccine hesitancy captures headlines in developed countries, at the global level, the biggest barrier to vaccination remains lack of access. While some people have access to vaccines but don't use them, millions of others would love to have access to these life-saving tools but don't. That's why WHO's top priority is universal health coverage based on strong primary health care, so that all people have access to quality, affordable, essential health services, including vaccination. Thank you all for your commitment and support for ensuring everyone benefits from the power of vaccines. I thank you.
I'm really sorry not to be with you for this very important meeting due to the fact that we had our Gavi board meeting yesterday in Geneva. This is such an important topic, and the welcome report that came out last week showed that although most people are trusting in vaccines and understand their efficacy, that more and more, particularly in developed countries, people are asking questions. And that is a problem because, of course, today, with the internet, misinformation can spread at the speed of light. And so one of the challenges now is how do we think about trying to make sure that the right information is available? So one of the things for social media is to make sure that they remove the information that is patently false and that is even misleading. And so that's one important priority. But a second thing social media companies can do is clearly when people are looking and searching for information, it's because they want information. So it's not only getting rid of the bad information, but how can you steer those people to verified, high-quality information that is appropriate for them? Of course, we also need to have influencers who are there to answer questions, people in the community who can instill confidence. I've personally written to the company CEOs of the major social media and internet companies to ask them both to try to make sure misinformation is removed, but also that they have a steer towards good information people. And we're going to continue to try to engage with this going forward with all the alliance partners as part of our work on demand for countries, because we want to make sure that this an infectious disease of lack of trust doesn't spread further from developed countries into developing countries.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Kimmel. Over the years, I've spoken about a number of controversial issues, but I had no idea that one of the most controversial would be a segment encouraging parents to vaccinate their kids. Why this was controversial, I still don't know. Measles, a disease that had been eradicated in the year 2000, is back, but still some parents are refusing to vaccinate their children, which threatens the health of all children. So I spoke about it, and a surprising number of Americans objected because many of them are riddled with another disease called ignorance. Ignorance is an epidemic that spreads very quickly, mostly on social media. It affects the human brain with misinformation. Worldwide, measles is up 300% from just last year, in spite of campaigns by responsible governments and organizations like UNICEF, which has supplied more than 2 billion vaccinations in the last 20 years. Imagine not allowing your own children to get a miraculous, life-saving medicine that gives their bodies the opportunity to overpower highly infectious and deadly diseases like polio, like diphtheria, and measles. Millions of lives have been saved by vaccination, mostly children and the elderly. So don't give in. Fight this disease called ignorance with everything you've got. Use your voice and your platforms to speak the truth. Speak out. Vaccines are safe, effective, life-saving, and necessary. Tell your family and friends that doctors and scientists know more than Facebook and Twitter. Support UNICEF and thank them for their efforts to keep measles and polio where they belong in the past. Thank you.
Our panel discussion, which I know you're all looking forward to, we do have a special guest. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Ethan Lindenberger. Ethan is 18 years old, a high school graduate from Ohio. And Ethan made headlines here in the United States when, against the wishes of his mother, he got himself vaccinated. And Ethan has been very careful to point out that parents who don't want their children vaccinated are acting out of concern for their kids, but nonetheless, he respectfully disagreed with his mother. Not something that goes down well in my house, but I respect your right to do it, Ethan. And Ethan has testified in front of the Senate, and he's here today. So, Ethan, tell us about your decision and how you reached it.
Thank you. So thank you, everyone, for allowing me to speak here today. I want to thank everyone from UNICEF who has put on this discussion and everyone who has made every effort to increase the the safety, the effectiveness, and also the trust in vaccines, because this is an issue that has reached my family and it's going to reach countless others if we don't try to improve the trust in vaccines continuously. And so after all of that, after hearing about what I've done, it can be confusing to think how I fell into this position, right? I'm only 18, I'm the youngest person in this room, and it's kind of terrifying, honestly, but we're going to move past that. So throughout the past 5 months of my life, I've been focused on one single goal: the education and awareness of vaccines, increasing the security, the trust, and honestly, just addressing the ignorance that's plaguing so many people. My journey has taken me all across the country and even will take me across the world. And I'm so grateful for everyone that has made this happen, but there's still more that can be done. And as stated, my mom is someone who identifies as anti-vaccine. She believes that vaccines cause autism, brain damage, that they don't benefit the health and safety of society, despite the fact such opinions have been disproven by the scientific community time and time again. And so I've sat here thinking to myself, how do we fix this? You can see how we can publish studies, we can get celebrities, vocal leaders to talk about vaccine safety and how effective they are, and it can seem like nothing's going to change. And after my testimony, I realized I'd found myself in the position of a leader, of someone who was collectively voicing the outrage of my generation and other generations that want vaccines to be accepted for what they are, safe and effective. And that's scary. Again, I'm 18. I don't want to be the poster child for this movement. I want to be going to college. I want to be celebrating prom. I want to be doing stupid stuff, but I'm not. I'm here. So we need to encourage young people, though, to take action. Because although I sat there most of my life hearing about vaccines, hearing lies that they were dangerous, that they would cause autism, that the reason we didn't vaccinate was for our own health and safety, rather than endangering it, we need to encourage young people to hear those lies and to stand up against them. Because I grew up hearing them and didn't do anything about it. And it wasn't until I was 18 did I make the decision to stand up and say, this isn't right. But for years, I could have stood up and said, no, this isn't right. And even though I can't take action, I can voice opposition to these lies. And so young people especially have a great opportunity to be vocal leaders in a movement that collectively ruins anti-vaccine disinformation. On top of that, we also need to end online misinformation in every way possible without outright calling for bans. Because honestly, I've seen how anti-vaccine individuals will be proponents of a lie that the media, that the science community is all out to get them. And if we strike down information, collectively demonizing any information that voices question, that will only fuel those lies. So instead, correcting that, showing that that information is not correct, and also addressing better information to people. If I was given a CDC article years before I made a decision to stand up, I may have thought earlier, maybe this isn't true. People like my mother believe vaccines cause autism, they cause brain damage, that they aren't safe and effective, and they're not malicious either. It's a lie that anti-vaccine individuals are dangerous people, that they are evil people. Although the ideas are dangerous, the individuals are spreading information and they're putting their kids in danger for reasons that are the same that we vaccinate. It's for the health and safety of their children. Their intuitions as a mother, as a father, as a community leader have been taken advantage of because of these lies. That misinformation must be addressed. Leaders need to take a stand. Young people need to take a stand. Organizations like UNICEF are continuing to stand up. The CDC is continuing to stand up and do research. And all of that is going to address criticism. It's going to cause people to get upset. And even for myself, every single time I go on social media, I go out in public, I talk to people, there's always one or two people that get upset. I've had people that have demonized me as a Nazi, as an actor. People have said that I am pushing for a new government control of the medical industry, which is not true. And, all of that's frustrating because when you stand up for something that's right, there's going to be some people that get upset. Good ideas don't avoid criticism. And we need to remain unbroken throughout all of that and continue to stand up for the truth. Thank you.
Ethan, thank you so much for coming, and I hope you get some time to hang out before you go to college. I'm thinking of my own 19-year-old son, and drawing a comparison there, but good for you. So I would like to move now to our panel discussion, and just to say that we will have 35 minutes of discussion and then 10 minutes to open it up to the floor. We're just going to do a bit of shuffling here. Thank you to the Ambassador and to Henrietta Fore, and I'd like to invite my other panelists to come in. And while that happens, I'll just introduce everyone. Next to me is Gillian Steelberger. She's the Director of Global Polling at Harvard School of Public Health. There's Jason Hirsch next to Gillian. He's the Head of Health Policy at Facebook. Sitting down next to me now is Chris Wolfe. He's the Deputy Director of the Vaccine Delivery Team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And then Stuart Simonson at the end, Assistant Director General of the World Health Organization. So I'd like to start with Gillian because she has done a ton of research into all of the polling that exists onto attitudes. And Gillian, just tell us, what are the reasons behind people's hesitancy to vaccinate their children?
Sure.
I think you should be live, actually.
I should be live already?
Yep, should be.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much for the question and also for the opportunity to be here today with you all. When you're talking about sort of the reason behind hesitancy, I first want to say that hesitancy is just one of the reasons that children don't get vaccinated. When we put it in context, right, the biggest challenge is actually the infrastructure and actually getting access to vaccination. So I want to put that in context. And then I want to kind of dive deep to answer your question specifically. And this is one of the key questions that actually kind of drives our research. We have had a lovely collaboration with UNICEF for almost 6 years, where we've been in the field with ground partners and partners around this table as well, to try to answer that question from the perspective of parents and caregivers, to try to say, hey, why are you hesitant? Why aren't you vaccinating? Why are you refusing or delaying? And I think that the reasons that are really relevant to this discussion today do have to do some with rumors and misinformation. But it's not super straightforward. It's not like every time a rumor walks by, someone says, yes, I believe that. So it's a bit grayer than that. We want to think about, I think, the why behind the why. That is, why are some people receptive to some rumors, and why people don't jump wholesale into rumors. Some people believe a rumor a little bit. I don't want them to believe it at all, but they believe it a little bit, or maybe more. And so we've got to watch that. And we want to think about some of the issues where we can think about what allows rumors to take root. Because rumors don't take root in isolation. They take root in lots of things, and I want to highlight two. One is they take root in frustration with the health system and the vaccination services. And we have to kind of take ownership of that. And basically, this is an experience that we see in high-income settings and low-income settings. In high-income settings, we see parents who finally get a chance to get off work, bring their kids to vaccinators. They rush to the clinic in 3 minutes with no chance to ask a question. And whether that child is vaccinated or not, it leaves a bad taste in their mouth. And we see it in low-income settings where moms who walk kilometers to get to a clinic are told to sit on a bench for hours so they can wait so enough people show up, so they can open a vial. That it's not, their child isn't worthy. And that doesn't sit well with people. And so we need to think about how we create an environment that is more respectful and doesn't lend them to the idea that now I don't feel respected and now that rumor takes root. Now I'm a little opener to that idea. Now that misinformation makes more sense. And I think another place where rumors take root is actually in the success of what we've seen of vaccination. As Henry Ford kind of forecasted in this, is that when there are not cases around parents, they don't see the disease every day, understandably, actually, other things become priorities, other health issues, clean water, basics, security, education. There are legitimately a lot of other concerns. And so when the vaccination comes on really, really heavy-handed, it feels maybe like there's a disconnect and that they aren't being listened to. And so we need to think about integrating vaccination into broader health services, meeting people's needs, understanding them, building universal care that is really sort of part of the whole picture and not leaving parents just with that. So I feel like that's kind of the lessons of the research that we hear.
Thank you so much for that, Gillian. Now, Jason, I know you've been waiting for this moment eagerly. What is Facebook doing to stop the spread of disinformation about the effectiveness of vaccines?
Thanks, Laura. I have been waiting eagerly for that. But also thank you to UNICEF and to Ambassador Béchot for including us. I think it's important that we be a part of these conversations, and we're very grateful to have been included, both so that we can explain to folks the steps that we are taking here, but also because so much of the work that we are doing in health is based on the relationships that we are building with partners like the organizations here and Gavi and CDC and others that are not here. We are not health experts, but we are eager to learn from health experts and work with health experts so that we can do the right things. So in terms of our approach to misinformation about vaccinations, there's really two key aspects of it. The first is actually addressing the misinformation itself, and the second is promoting more authoritative information. So as to the first, we are working with organizations like those that are here to identify hoaxes about vaccines, things like vaccines cause autism, that have been widely and authoritatively debunked by the scientific community through public position papers that are available to anyone, including Facebook. When we have that information from health experts, and then we can incorporate it into our own detection systems, if we find that information on Facebook, if you are a group, a Facebook group or a Facebook page that spreads that sort of misinformation, then there are a set of consequences once we find that. First of all, we will significantly reduce the distribution of not just that information, but all information coming out of that page or group to make sure that we are taking a sufficiently aggressive stance and not needing to catch every single piece of misinformation to have an effect. Second, folks have mentioned recommendation services today. So on Facebook, you can be recommended content as you may be interested in this group or this page. If you are a page that spreads misinformation about vaccinations or a group, you will be pulled out of those recommendation systems. Also, Facebook search is another thing that was mentioned. So if you are a group or page that spreads misinformation about vaccinations, you will be demoted in search results that are in any way relevant to this topic. If it doesn't matter if you put in the word vax or vaccine or vaccinate, you will be reduced in all of those results. When it comes to advertising, we are not accepting any advertisements that include any of the misinformation about vaccinations, and also pages on Facebook are allowed to raise money through their page. We are disabling fundraising tools for any page that spreads misinformation about vaccination. So on the reducing misinformation on vaccines, those are the principal steps that we're taking, although we're continuing to iterate and look for more ways where possible to be as aggressive as we can be here. There's also the promoting authoritative content side. So we have been exploring for the past few months in close collaboration with WHO and CDC and UNICEF and others, how we can present to people when they encounter conversations about vaccinations on Facebook, authoritative content that rises to the top of their search or their group conversation or the page that will give people some basic information about vaccines and point them towards the websites of the CDC or the WHO or groups that have the authoritative information. One of the reasons we've been doing a lot of research here has come up in what others have said on the panel. We want to make sure we do this that encourages people to read the information that we're giving them and to actually visit the authoritative websites like the WHOs and the CDCs. We understand that there are a lot of people out there who genuinely have questions about the appropriateness of vaccines for them and their children, and we want to reach those people in an effective manner. We are not trying to drive them away or have them feel isolated. We want to acknowledge their concerns and invite them into the dialogue and make sure that the dialogue to which we are inviting them in is the authoritative dialogue that is happening on the websites of the organizations that are represented here.
And yet, so if you're not taking advertising from anti-vaccine groups, you've changed your algorithms, you're not recommending that people join other anti-vaccine groups, how do you explain that misinformation is still spreading, apparently?
Well, a few things. So first of all, we are addressing this issue, but this is a new policy that we implemented in March, and it is still ramping up across Facebook. It is because we are going out and finding this misinformation and demoting it, and because there are billions of pieces of content across Facebook, it takes a little time for us to reach everything and appropriately demote it. And of course, while we're doing that, new content is being posted. So we are addressing it, but it is fair to say that it doesn't mean every single piece of content that may be misinformation has been sufficiently addressed and reduced as of today. But in addition, I think it's important to distinguish that we are finding and taking serious action against misinformation about vaccinations. So you mentioned anti-vaccine content. That can come in a variety of flavors. That can come in someone asking a question on Facebook about whether they ought to vaccinate their child. It can come in the form of someone posting on Facebook, "Today I vaccinated my child and she got a fever, and I'm concerned about that. You should be careful." We are not taking action against that content. You may still find it on Facebook. So it is true that the ads are now being disallowed and have been disallowed for months. We've been working for a few months now and will continue to work to demote the misinformation. But I think it's fair to say that it may be possible that you will still encounter this on Facebook from time to time. And the best way that we can counter that is by continuing to be aggressive and by making sure that you are also encountering, and ideally first encountering, the authoritative information from groups like the WHO and CDC.
Thank you, Jason. Well, turning to the WHO, Stuart, the WHO has identified vaccine hesitancy as one of the top threats to global health, but it doesn't just mean misinformation, does it?
No, in fact, it's a broad term that is used sometimes to describe everything that leads to under-immunization, so access, trust, the flexibility in the system to accommodate working families and so forth. This is something that we've got to work on. As Dr. Tedros said, this is our chief concern, is access, right? It is also, I think, important to appreciate that hesitancy, the reason that we identified it as being such a grave risk, is that this balance that we have with nature is very delicate. And as you see with measles, 300% increase over 2018 in the same period. This is a sobering, deadly statistic, and it's something that means something, really means something to public health. And so that's why we designated it a health risk. I think also we have to do more to help set the context for immunization. I mean, one of the reasons for hesitancy is the success of immunization. We have so little experience with the diseases that our parents have. And so it's easier, maybe, to say, well, I don't want to get this diphtheria vaccine. We haven't seen diphtheria in the United States in so long. I spent almost 5 years in Haiti before coming to WHO, and we had a little hesitancy at the hospital where I worked. We got tetanus and diphtheria vaccine to do catch-up immunizations. And at first, some of the medical staff didn't want the vaccine. And then we had a case of diphtheria come in. Everybody wanted the vaccine. There was no hesitancy. And so it's about, I think, helping to frame and contextualize what the vaccine achieves. And this is about a dialogue also with the target population, with people. As Dr. Tedros said, it's about universal health care too, because who is it that we go to for medical advice, right? Who do we trust? Nurses and doctors. But if you don't have access to nurses and doctors, maybe it's a lot easier to accept some of these ideas that float around on the internet or on the radio or wherever. So that's, I think, the reason. We see this as an inflection point. And without proper attention, what we're seeing with measles could be much, much worse across the board.
And Chris, you work on the ground in developing countries trying to encourage people to be vaccinated. What risks do you see if vaccination rates stagnate or go backwards?
Thank you, and I'd like to start by thanking UNICEF and the Ambassador of Japan for this opportunity. And we do see risk. The irony of all of this is that more children are immunized now than ever before. Vaccine rates are the highest that they've ever been in human history. And the vaccine hesitancy and the power of the spread of some of this misinformation actually puts at risk what has been an incredible achievement of humanity. I was doing, you mentioned forgetting disease. and I was doing a family history project with my son. And he asked me why my grandmother was raised by her aunt and uncle. And it reminded me that it's because her father died of tuberculosis, her mother remarried, contracted measles from the child of the family that she married into, and then she subsequently died. And she had an older brother that she had never met that died of pertussis. This is someone I knew. This is in the United States. This is 2 generations ago. And we forget so easily that these diseases have killed our children, our families, our friends, for most of human history. And it's only in the last 50 years, really, that we've enjoyed this period where vaccines don't cause this devastation. And I think what we need to do to address all of this misinformation is tell this story.
Yes.
But it's a good story. Yeah, no, that's interesting. And Gillian, when you hear Ethan talk about his mother and her very sincerely held view that to vaccinate him would risk damaging him, what does the research that you see say about the best way to talk to people, parents, in a way that isn't condescending, that isn't patronizing, that makes them feel that they should vaccinate their children and they're not taking a risk?
Yeah, for sure. It's a really important question. And I think first I want to say that, Ethan, this may be my dream. Someone says to me, if only I had seen a CDC report with the facts about vaccination, I would have leapt up, defied my parents, and gotten vaccinated. I feel like this is something, as a health researcher, that I've been waiting to hear a long time. I'm very glad to have met you today.
He's the unicorn.
Yes, yes. Because I think for the most part, actually, facts, they are certainly critical. People do need to know vaccines are safe and effective. These diseases are terrible. But that is clearly not enough. Facts, the same way people don't just look at a rumor walking by and say, hey, that's for me. They don't look at a fact walking by and say, yes, that's for me. People actually think a little bit about facts, and they may be more and less receptive. They may say, that fact already fits with what I know and believe. I think I'll take that one. Not really open to new information. And so I think that in reality, we talked about in an earlier portion of today, talked about, this disease of ignorance. And I would say, if we're thinking about the challenges of hesitancy, our best immunization against hesitancy is actually trust and building trust. That is our vaccine of choice. And that is not about communicating the facts in the right way. There is no brochure, pamphlet, megaphone, button, hat, logo that is going to actually solve that problem. This is really about building institutions that are worthy of trust. This is about building universal health coverage, building systems that give people access to the health services they need, being valued and reaching communities in a collaborative way to understand their need and respecting that. It's about giving the people who work there the resources to be able to do their job, paying them regularly. We're talking about that. This is really a very real issue in so many places. Giving them skills and time to have a conversation. If doctors are really trusted, but you're rushed through like you're on a conveyor belt, well, there's no chance to have that critical dialogue that actually enhances trust. And we have to figure out a way to get that system to do that. And then we need to be welcoming people, reaching to communities, understanding their perspective. Because I think what Ethan also said was, his mom does this because she loves him. That's why it's happening. So if we don't hear that and invite people respectfully, they will turn away. And so we need to reach out to trusted partners, get them engaged, reach out while we're building it up. And I think at the same time, we need to build up, and we need our partners on the other side, on the information side, to make sure that when we're doing this incredibly hard work, that it's not all just, run down by sort of an onslaught of the rumors and misinformation. So we kind of need to work both sides of this. And I think that's what we're here today to talk about.
Indeed. Thank you, Gillian. And Jason, just to return to you, Facebook has these very complex guidelines, don't you, about not having content that incites real-world harm. I just wonder, how do you define, when you look at the possible risk of people not being vaccinated, the risk to global public health, does that constitute real-world harm in your definition?
That's a great question. So the To take one step back, I think Facebook has a set of what we call community standards, which govern what information can and can't be on Facebook. And that runs the gamut from information that is from a false account or that may incite violence or that is hate speech. When we encounter that, we take it off of Facebook. Then there is misinformation, which we substantially reduce the distribution of but don't remove from Facebook. Within that category, there is a small subsection where if information is, we find it to be misinformation, or a third-party fact checker finds it to be, or it violates one of the hoaxes that has been widely debunked by the health community. If in a situation we think it is likely to cause imminent physical harm, we will remove it and not just reduce it. But that exception is narrow and is not the kind of exception that we use for generalized harm that comes from giving people the wrong information about vaccines. It is, for example, something that we've used in Pakistan. So in situations in Pakistan where health workers have been out going door to door in their polio eradication efforts, there have been situations, and Executive Director Four mentioned this, where the health workers' lives have been at risk because misinformation has been spreading about their intentions and the specific vaccines they were using. And so in those situations where we thought the misinformation was putting their lives in danger, and it seemed had the intention of doing that, we have removed misinformation, but that is the exception, not the rule to how we handle misinformation, which largely flows from our mission, which is to be a platform for free expression and to err on the side of expression, even when it can go across to misinformation, and to handle that by really reducing the distribution and not giving it very much reach, but allowing people to speak outside of situations where we think it will cause physical, real-world, imminent harm.
And is it your view that you counter disinformation with good information? Is that where you come down in order to avoid alienating people that use Facebook?
We come down on the side that you need to do two things to combat it. You first need to significantly reduce the distribution, and then you need to provide people context and authoritative information. So in many ways, I think the story that Ethan told is informative here. We want to be a platform where it is very challenging for Ethan's mom, who we know is trying to do the right thing for Ethan, to find misinformation about vaccinations. But we also want to be a platform where it's very easy for Ethan to find that CDC article, because when he searches for vaccines, it comes to the top of the results. So we want to address this problem by doing two things, and it really works best if we do them both.
Now, thank you. We were talking about the measles outbreak, but there are also issues with polio and vaccination against polio. And this is one where I remember my grandparents talking about childhood friends that they lost through polio. And again, it's like a generational, as Chris was talking about, we lose these oral histories over time. So I'm just interested, Chris, to ask you, what do you see, what is the trend line on polio and vaccination?
So, right, make sure this is on. Polio is now at its lowest point in history. It's confined to 2 countries, essentially, and we are on the verge of Africa being certified polio-free, which would be a massive achievement. Those 2 countries, Pakistan and Afghanistan, have had a long struggle with polio, and I think the root of the story is in many things that others have said in this discussion so far. It's about, most of Pakistan is polio-free. I think it's also important to mention, and has been for years. The communities where polio continues to circulate, and it's been surprising to see how small those communities can be that can continue to support the virus. That those communities, the core issue has been connecting with those communities. And we found, like in urban Karachi, urbanization is a big challenge for immunization programs everywhere. The cities are growing faster than health services can be delivered. And there are large parts of urban Karachi that have no health services at all. So you have these marginalized communities, often people who have come in that traditionally aren't from Karachi, that are kind of a blind eye is turned to them. And you have polio vaccinators that are coming, giving a vaccine and providing a service, But just like was said, there are other services that these communities want. And I think without having established that connection, without having addressed and delivered those broader services that were mentioned, that it is one of these fertile grounds for mistrust. So you're not interested in me for water or schools for my children, but you're really interested in this one particular thing. And that naturally raises questions. So I think the program, the final push to eradicate polio is going to be connecting with those communities and actually reestablishing trust, ensuring that the services that they deserve get delivered. I would also mention there's another aspect, and that's related to Afghanistan. A lot of children live in countries that are affected, a lot of unimmunized children now live in countries that are affected by conflict. And Afghanistan is one such example. And in that case, I think we as a global immunization community need to do more to deliver services where government services have been disrupted due to fighting. We saw this in Syria, we've seen it in Iraq, we've seen it in Yemen. These countries had strong immunization programs for decades, and in years they have been completely destroyed. And we have mechanisms now and funding that will allow for an immunization campaign or two, but these are protracted conflicts. And I think what we need to think about in the global community is how do we create structures that immunization services, other essential health services can be delivered and reached through NGOs, civil society, until government services can be reestablished. And right now, it's just too difficult to do that in a lot of these places. So in Afghanistan, interrupting polio transmission there is going to require creative ways to deliver these services where the system is fundamentally broken.
Thank you. And Stuart, we've been talking a lot about trust and how if parents felt more trust in vaccines and medical professionals, then perhaps they would have their children vaccinated. What do you think are the ways to establish trust and speak respectfully to people so that they get the message that perhaps they should vaccinate their kids?
I think an ongoing and nuanced dialogue, right, depending on the context is important. But really, it's about having, I think, a relationship with a clinician, having a clinician one can go to for advice. I think in my own family, and my mother is probably a click away from yours in terms of worrying about things, and she went to the local public health doctor in our town. And he was the one who persuaded her to do X, Y, and Z. And he wasn't a particularly patient man, but he was very, very good and trusted. That position doesn't exist anymore. And in those days, my parents couldn't afford a primary care doc, so it was the public health doctor. So who's doing that today? And that's in the United States. So I wonder what happens in other places, and maybe this is what we need to focus on, as Dr. Tedros suggested. I want to just say one other thing. Beginning in December of this year is the 40th anniversary of the greatest achievement in public health, arguably, the eradication of smallpox. Smallpox was eradicated with a vaccine, the very first vaccine. In the 20th century alone, 300 million people died of smallpox. Think about that, 300 million people on a much smaller population base. Now, we won't be able to eradicate every vaccine, every preventable disease. Polio will be eradicated. We know that. But for the rest, we have to struggle with maintaining a balance. And that's about all of us doing our part, not just the physicians and the nurses, but everyone who, if you have a problem with the vaccine or are concerned about a vaccine, seek out information. But you can't do that if you don't have anywhere to go. And we've got to provide that.
Thank you. And Gillian, you studied polling, you studied public messaging. What do you think is the way to counter misinformation about vaccines and people's hesitancy?
So I think that we're going back to this critical issue that the way to counter that hesitancy is to use the vaccine we have of trust. So how do we build that up? How do we build these systems up so that they are respectful, engaging, and how do we engage in partners that can help us prevent sort of the onslaught of the other side? And so this is really, I think, the essential element. And this is, I think, a theme that I'm hearing across everyone's comments that I hope is a really important takeaway message that we send to the world today, that this is not just about vaccines in isolation, this is about building systems, making sure there's a doctor or a trusted health professional to give you that advice and to make the connections in a way that is culturally relevant, is respected, and comes from the community request and doesn't feel forced upon.
And Jason, Facebook says that it needs to do more on this. Can you share with us what more you're going to do?
The more that we're working on at the moment is how to elevate the authoritative content and make sure that it's front and center for people in various parts of Facebook when they encounter the conversation of vaccines. And the thing that we've really been focused on over these past few months is how to really connect with the people who need that information most and invite them into the dialogue. To go back to Jimmy Kimmel's message, there's certainly a world out there that thinks it would be as easy as saying vaccines are safe and effective, and we thought it would be that simple, but what we've learned over time is that if you want to engage in a conversation with people that are hesitant, you have to be empathetic, you have to build trust, you have to legitimize their concerns and have a conversation. And so the thing that we are most working on is how to promote authoritative sources like WHO and Gates and UNICEF and CDC, but how to do it in a way that really encourages people who have questions, who are hesitant, to engage with that material and feel legitimized and acknowledged, but then be able to be persuaded by all of the expertise of these groups.
How responsible does Facebook feel as a publisher of information when you're accused of publishing misinformation about vaccines?
So we don't publish information. We are just a platform that allows for our users to post information and have conversations. It's not Facebook's information, but we feel responsible for our users and we feel responsible for the conversations that are happening on Facebook. So we want to make sure that we are minimizing the amount of misinformation about health generally and vaccines specifically in any conversation on Facebook. And we also want to make sure that we're promoting authoritative information when it comes to health. So we feel a responsibility to do better in health and to do it by making sure there is much less misinformation that one might encounter and more credible information that is easier to find.
Thank you. And just before I open it up to the floor, Chris, if I could ask you, because you were talking earlier, perhaps contrary to the theme of our discussion, about the good news story on vaccine. What is vaccines? What is your hope for the next 20 years?
So, thanks. I think the good news is what I had said earlier, that more people are immunized with vaccines than ever before. These diseases in some countries, in some communities, are, as one of my colleagues has said here, are in the history books. I think that was Jimmy Kimmel, so I get the privilege of quoting Jimmy Kimmel. That is the good news. We are at a high point. There are challenges that we've all brought up, and we need to make sure we take those challenges on very robustly and vigorously so that these achievements are not undermined. I think that vaccines, there are 20 million children still not reached with vaccines for a lot of the reasons that have been mentioned. We have to reach those children, particularly in a globalized world where these diseases do not respect borders, they travel very quickly, and having pockets of immunization anywhere put risk to really anyone. And that's also a new feature of our world that wasn't true even 1 or 2 generations ago. And so this level of 85% of global immunization coverage, great achievement. It isn't enough, and we have to continue investing in vaccines, continue telling the good news story, continue making sure that people know that the diseases that we have forgotten are still there. They can still come back, except for the ones that we can successfully eradicate, which are going to be a few. I would say one other good news story. A lot of communities in the United States, for example, they're not worried about pertussis. They're not worried about diseases like diphtheria. A lot of communities are worried about things like cancer. Wouldn't it be great if we had a solution for cancer? For vaccines, we actually have not one, but 2 vaccines that prevent cancer. The leading cause of cancer in women is cervical cancer. There is a solution to that. That is amazing. We can make the leading cause of cancer globally go away. And that is another good news story, and we need to do more to make sure that happens.
Thank you, Chris. Now, I'd like to, and to all the panelists, I'd like to open it up now to questions from the floor. If you could say who you are and who your question is aimed at, that would be very helpful. So if you want to just raise your hand if you have a question and I can call on you. Anyone have any questions? Sir.
Thank you. My name is Manohar. I work for the Bangladesh Permanent Mission here, and I follow, among other issues, the health issues, global health issues at the UN. So, I mean, all of us perhaps know that Bangladesh has been doing very good in the vaccination coverage overall and the eradication of polio and also other 6 preventable diseases, childhood preventable diseases. But I was wondering, I mean, we did it successfully with the help from the donors and also the Gavi and other international partners. But as you have just mentioned, I mean, there are cervical cancer vaccination prevention, and there are some more diseases which actually needs vaccination during the adolescence period. So I was just wondering whether the international partners and the donors agencies would like to continue supporting countries like Bangladesh. Thank you.
Chris.
And other colleagues on the panel, feel free to jump in as well. We're increasingly talking about life course vaccination, and that is an important issue. Gavi, you mentioned, supports the introduction of HPV vaccine, and Bangladesh is a member of the Gavi Alliance and Gavi community, so is eligible for that sort of support. And we hope that there are other vaccines in the pipeline that will take this broader kind of expanded view of life course immunization. Let others.
Thank you. Stuart, did you have something? No? Either of you two? No? All right. Thank you so much for that question. Anybody else with a question? Do please, sir.
Thank you. I'm Scott Ratson, and I'd like to first thank UNICEF for an excellent brochure, as well as this piece together. So I've been a senior fellow at Harvard Kennedy School for the last year and been focusing on vaccination over the last number of months and years as I've been editing the Journal of Health Communication. We've put together a Salzburg statement on vaccine acceptance signed by over 70 public health people, experts around the world, suggesting opportunities for all of us in the room to engage in all sorts of ways. I presented this at the meeting of World Information Transfer here at the UN, an NGO looking at this, as well as a variety of others. So my question is, while I really appreciate Henrietta Ford's excellent presentation, as well as Mr. Ambassador, where are the next steps in terms of some of the accountability to these areas? Whilst I'm a public health physician, we say do no harm. I listened very carefully to the Facebook pieces who said we need to be aggressive as we can be, but yet we will not err, if I can read this right, we will err on the side of exposure. We'll continue to let people have the information. So whilst we have called as early as this week for business and other sectors to get engaged and to do things positively, how are we going to bring the evidence base, which does not always take us to authoritative sources, but the sources that build trust, the UNICEF sources, the WHO sources, the CDC, the NGOs, and others who also have evidence-based approaches. How are we going to bring that accountability to bear? How do we get the people around this table, as they have been with every woman, every child, as well as some other areas, to work in this area? So I just put that forward. We do have this statement. It's in the peer-reviewed literature. We've had articles in the Journal of the American Medical Association, Washington Post, and Financial Times. And we believe that this new idea for an international working group on vaccinations and public health solutions is an area, but it's an area that needs to engage all sectors. So that's my question on accountability and how do we engage all sectors meaningfully in this regard?
Jason, do you want to pick that one up?
Sure. So as I said at the beginning, our hope, and as others have said too, is for this to be a group engagement, Executive Director for opened with this, and the ambassador mentioned it as well. I think we need to work together as one here. Facebook is a platform that brings people together, and we want to make sure that expert organizations are as much a part of that as we can have them be, and that we are promoting the authoritative information they have so that it is not only available to our users, but front and center when it comes to vaccines for users who are looking for it or encountering those discussions. And those are the things we're doing in the short term, but we want to continue to partner and to listen and learn from the people that are here so that we can figure out if there are more and better longer term solutions through collaboration. We are very open to that and are eager to determine what those are and to take those steps as well.
Gillian, do you have something on next steps?
Sure, and I think really it's not just next steps, it's about accountability. And I think I can probably actually most speak to the academic side that we're here, which is that if we are to have technical expertise, we have to bring that to bear to these issues, and then we have to do that collaboratively and work with countries to understand their need and to share that. And to bring to bear the truth and evidence that we hope provides not just epidemiologically, but also in terms of what people are thinking and feeling, and bringing their voice through the research. So I think that's the accountability on the academic side.
That sounds good. Now, sir.
Hi, I'm Stefan Peterson, Chief of Health at UNICEF. I'd like, in response here and building on what panelists have said before here, to offer a 5-point agenda. And the first one, I think, as the ambassador pointed out, is to build primary health care actually by removing barriers, be they geographic, social, economic, to accessing care. The second is that care should provide quality care and not just any care. And we heard the example of your public health physician, etc. And it's actually by those two first steps that we can build that trust that I think we've heard resonating throughout. And then we need to build on top of that vaccination with correct knowledge and information, and I think we've heard many points speaking to that, and then actually tackling the misinformation. So that's our 5-point agenda to tackle this, and also acknowledging that most people or most children that are not vaccinated in the world, as Gillian said, actually do this out of lack of access, and as Dr. Tedros says, they would like to be.
Thank you for that 5-point plan. Are there any more questions from the floor? We have a couple of minutes. Ma'am, yes, go for it.
Add one thing on accountability. I think there's room for a lot more data and better data in this area. What you measure improves. And we measure some things, but not others. And so the more, I think, work that goes into that, the easier, maybe not easy, the more accessible accountability will be.
Thank you. Ma'am, you had a question.
I did, thank you. Lee Greenslade from Just Actions. If we want to imagine a planet where more than 80% of children everywhere are fully protected with all the vaccines, and we accept there'll always be a proportion of the population that is skeptical, to what extent do we need a very sophisticated mix of incentives and disincentives to encourage parents to do the right thing? So every country's experimented a little bit on the disincentive side. Here in the States, it's very hard to get your kids into school or summer camp. But in many other countries, there's nothing. And we have very little on the incentive side, actually rewarding parents, whether it's with cash or other incentives, to do the right thing. So my question is, who is working on the right mix of incentives and disincentives for a planet that actually delivers on more than 80% of kids fully protected?
John, Chris, do you know of any such initiatives?
There has been a lot of work done on conditional cash transfers, and I'm sure you're aware. And I think they're one of the tools that could be deployed, and particularly with what you're saying, some of the communities where maybe there's more hesitancy and just a reward behavior that we want. And
what is that, sorry? Is that literally paying someone a conditional cash transfer?
Yes. And it's been done in two ways. It's there are cash rewards that go to health workers that reach communities, and then sometimes there are also kind of cash rewards or in-kind health services, additional packages that are given for the families. I think a lot of that is more effective and most effective when it is built on trust. That it has to be built on this basis of a quality health system, quality health service delivery, And then on top, you can layer these things. When you try to layer that, paying people to do something when there's a fundamental mistrust, I think that can cause some difficulties. So it's about how does it get deployed most effectively? And I know there are others in the room that know about this as well.
Yeah, Stuart, do you have anything on that one?
No, I agree entirely with Chris. It does seem to me that we have to accept that parents want to do the right thing. It's not about, I think, needing to be incented to do the right thing. It's about helping them have the information to make that decision, more than I think about cash payments or things like that.
But
at least that's my own view.
I'll just ask Gillian and Jason, though, to comment on the idea of incentives before we close, because it's an interesting one.
I'm actually not sure I have much to add to that, Laura. I think except to say that as there are innovative ideas, we want to continue to hear them, and to the extent the experts think there are ideas that should be promoted, then we want to be helpful. But as to the expert policy, I will leave that to the experts.
I think if we're going to invest money in this area, we should invest it in primary care and not in incentives.
All right, Gillian, do you have a closing thought about incentivization?
I think I'm reflecting the same comments, which is that this is more fundamental than just paying someone.
Yes.
And I think there's a risk that if you just have incentives without actually understanding the need, you may exacerbate the problem. And so it's not that in principle, the issue, it's that we actually have a bigger problem that we need to address. And I think that's why we're here partnered together with all these collaborators to take that on.
Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you to the Embassy of Japan and to UNICEF for sponsoring this. And refreshments will be served in the West Terrace of the Delegates Dining Lounge. Thank you, everybody.